It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Parental provision of alcohol was generally associated with increased adolescent alcohol use, and in some instances, increased heavy episodic drinking, as well as higher rates of alcohol-related problems.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure how this podcast is going to go today because you are more distracted than you possibly have ever been as we've been recording a podcast, Kylie. There is a tiny little puppy dog tiptoeing around. We've asked Facebook, we've asked everybody, 220,000 followers on Facebook, what do we call our new puppy dog? Loads of answers come through. We haven't filtered through them all yet. I'm sure that there's going to be a name for this dog soon, but right now, you just want to watch the dog. You don't even want a podcast.
It's so cool watching her explore her new surroundings.
She's licking my toes right now.
She can see the extension cord for
the podcast desk,
and she's looking at it like it's an alien.
But she's also like, I wonder what'll happen if I chew on that. It's going to be fun. So today we've got a conversation that I think is a really important one, and it has to do with kids and alcohol, and it's important for a handful of reasons. Before we talk about why it's important, can I just ask, now both you and I come from families where we don't have alcohol in our home, and neither you nor I are drinkers ourselves. So this is not an issue that we are confronting in our home in any kind of serious or significant way. We don't drink. Our parents, so the kids' grandparents don't drink. It makes the whole alcohol thing kind of really easy. But I know when I was a kid, I remember my grandpa used to take me to the pub in his old, I think it was an old Holden EH or something like that, and he would buy me a shandy. I was like 5 or 6 years old, and he's giving me a shandy, and I'm sitting out in the car drinking a shandy or a lemonade or whatever he bought me. And I also remember when I was a bit older, watching my grandpa giving my 2-year-old sisters sips of beer. I'm like 6 years old, and I'm watching him let my 2-year-old sisters sip from his beer cup. And there's that thing where people say, oh, that's right, just get the kids used to it. Were you force-fed alcohol when you were a kid?
So I've got a couple of pictures of me as, I would say probably a 2-year-old sitting on a picnic rug, and I've got a beer bottle in my, literally I've turned it upside down. But my parents assure me that it was an empty bottle that I
Well,
had.
it was once you'd finished it.
So I have no recollections whatsoever of being introduced to alcohol in any way, shape or form. I was surrounded by it. A lot of our extended family were drinkers, so it was around.
Yeah.
But I was never offered.
Yeah, interesting. The reasons are complicated and detailed for the reasons you and I don't have alcohol in our home. Part of it is for religious reasons. Part of it also, your dad is an alcoholic. Before he gave up alcohol and walked away from it, he had an alcohol problem, and he hasn't touched alcohol for 40 years or something like that?
Yeah, I was 3 by the time he made a decision to go
stop.
dry.
Yeah, that's right. And we have had in my extended family, tragically, we've had I had an uncle who was absolutely addicted to alcohol, and he got himself into some significant problems with violence, and one night he also beat down my grandparents' door, beat them up for money, and the next day he took his life as he grappled with the enormity of how far alcohol had taken him down a path that he didn't want to go. So really heavy kind of stuff in our families when it comes to alcohol, in addition to our personal values and belief, which is why we have just kept it out of our lives. But we're a little bit of an anomaly from that point of view. I mean, you can barely be called Australian and not have alcohol in the house, not be a drinker. So today, our conversation is really about what do you do with the kids around Christmas time? Is it okay for the kids to have a sip? When do you start introducing alcohol to the kids? I mean, a lot of people have got adolescents who are thinking it's summer holidays, everyone's a bit more relaxed. There's barbecues happening. There's beers in the esky. There's so much more opportunity, I guess, for kids to be engaging in alcohol-related behaviour, whether it's endorsed by parents or not. So our conversation today is, what do we do about it? Should we help our kids to drink responsibly by exposing them to it early, or are we better off keeping them as far away from it as possible?
Most people would recognise if they've been following you for a long time, we're pretty stickler to the rules. You know, social media has guidelines around what age kids should be engaging online.
Various platforms, yeah.
And we stick to those rules. And I think that they're there for a reason. And, it's illegal for children to have access to alcohol before the age of 18. And so for me, it's just a no-brainer. This is an adult experience, and it should be left for adults to experience.
So that's an uncommon response, and it may be because of our other biases and our other background issues. There's a study that was published this year in a journal called BMC Public Health. This is quite a prestigious journal. It's very well recognised and has been around for quite a long time. And they were looking at parental alcohol consumption and alcohol-related behaviour in relation to adolescent alcohol use. This is based in England. The culture around alcohol there is probably a little bit different to the Australian culture, but it's still one of the Western nations where we're fairly consistent across the board with a lot of these things. And what the researchers basically found is that a lot of parents, they look at whether or not they're drinkers or not. They also have a look at, on balance, is alcohol acceptable in the broader environment? And the researchers pretty much found that parents are aware of the risks and consequences of alcohol use and the wide range of influences that are shaping drinking behaviour. And they generally express, I guess you'd call it a light and loose level of disapproval of alcohol use among young people. However, they also see our adolescent alcohol use as inevitable, and it's something that happens within a drinking culture that's quite tolerant. And that's the same with Australia, right? We've got I said it before, are you even Australian if you don't drink? That culture is so tolerant. So there's an expectation that you will drink. And the research therefore showed that parents chose a reluctant acceptance kind of approach, which pretty much said that they said, well, we don't really approve of you drinking, but you're part of this wider culture and we drink a little bit of ourselves and we want you to make some decisions for yourself and we're not going to get you in trouble for it. You're pulling a funny face at me while I'm saying that. What's going on? Oh, no. Oh, the dog's eating one of the plants. I'm in the middle of something really important. We've got to let me finish this and then we'll fix up the dog and we'll press pause and record again. So basically, parents are saying, kids, you decide for yourself. Just don't overdo it. You can't have this conversation anymore, can you? You really have to go and rescue the plant from the dog.
We are experiencing dog-related technical difficulties. Please stand by.
There we go. So we've pressed pause and now we're pressing record again. I think that the message has gotten through there. And what it's basically saying is that parents don't like their kids drinking, but they're kind of reluctantly accepting of it. And in some cases, they even start to gradually introduce their kids to it with what's called boundaried provision. That is, you can do it, but only in this circumstance and only when I'm providing it for you and I'm kind of here to keep you safe. That's what the 2022 data suggests.
Obviously, we've acknowledged that this isn't an issue that we're dealing with at all, but as a parent who can see the risks associated with it, I really struggle with that mentality, because would you not want to keep your children as far away from it for as long as possible? I am actually struggling to find words, because I have seen so much devastation occur as a result of misuse of alcohol over the years, whether it be, lives taken themselves or involved in accidents.
But there's the violence issue, and there's also the sexual harm.
Well, and understanding
issues.
our children's brain development and how this impacts not only its development but the way it responds.
Yeah, just the biophysiological change that occurs. Let me go through a couple of other pieces of data, because I think this is a super interesting conversation. So a piece that was published in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs in 2014 by some researchers by the name of Kanak, Winters, Cacciola, Kirby and Aria said this in their paper. They said parental provision of alcohol was generally associated with increased adolescent alcohol use, and in some instances increased heavy episodic drinking, as well as higher rates of alcohol-related problems. And I said this is a really important study, because a lot of parents say, I'm going to reluctantly accept it and I'm going to have this boundaried provision. I'm going to give it to you so long as you only drink it in safe spaces where I'm giving it to you and I know how much you're drinking, and it's just happening around the dinner table or down in the rumpus room or out in the backyard. there's that kind of attitude. It's known as the Mediterranean effect. There's this belief that people in Mediterranean countries model responsible drinking and therefore their children don't grow up to have alcohol problems. Now, there's no data to support that. It's actually a big fat lie, but people find that a narrative that therefore justifies their behaviour here in Australia or the UK or the US or New Zealand in providing alcohol to their kids. But this 2014 paper says when you do that, parental provision of alcohol is associated with increased adolescent alcohol use, and in some instances, increased heavy episodic drinking. That's what we call binge drinking, as well as higher rates of alcohol-related problems. Data in support of the view that parental provision serves as a protective factor in the face of other risks were equivocal. In other words, it's not really there. Fascinating study. Let me add one more to this conversation. This one was published in the journal known as Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research. This is a 2017 paper that says age of alcohol initiation and progression to binge drinking adolescents, a prospective cohort study. And these researchers basically found that initiating alcohol use earlier in adolescence, whether parents are providing it or not, is associated with an increased risk of binge drinking and higher quantity of consumption in late secondary school, supporting an argument for delaying alcohol initiation for as long as possible to reduce the risk for problematic behaviour, problematic use, I should say, in later adolescence and the alcohol-related harms that may accompany this use. Research out of the University of New South Wales in Sydney shows the same thing. When you give your kids alcohol or when they have access to it with your reluctant acceptance, they see it ultimately as parental endorsement.
Exactly.
And they say, oh, I can do whatever I want and I'm going to do it whether mum and dad are giving it to me or not. And they tend to drink more and tend to drink heavier, and therefore the risks and the harms accelerate.
Well, there's also a level of confidence that is associated with that because they feel like they are equipped. Mum and dad have been teaching me how to drink responsibly. So therefore, I'm safe. I can do this. I've done it with my parents. I know what I'm up for. But when you think about your teenagers and you think about some of their most annoying traits, now I'm going to say spontaneity and an inability to think through the consequences of decisions is probably at the top of the list when it comes to our girls at least.
Yeah. So in the psychological terms for that are impulsivity and emotional and behavioural regulation.
That's without alcohol.
Yes.
With that, we understand what happens to our inhibitions when we partake of alcohol.
Yeah, so we become disinhibited, become more likely to move. What we actually have, this is fascinating to me. We become myopic. What that means is we become short-sighted. We pretty much just see what's in front of us.
Right, in that moment.
In that moment.
You talk about living in the moment.
Yeah, the moment's all that matters.
Yeah. And so for me, looking at what is already difficult to navigate as a parent with a teenager, adding alcohol to the mix, it feels like a recipe for disaster.
So the data is all over the place. It shows really clearly, consistent with our bias, which I'm really cautious, and I wanted to put that up front. I don't want people to think that we're wowsers around this. We know that it's inevitable that most kids are going to want to consume alcohol because it's so embedded in the culture. It's so much a part of Australian living and Western living generally. But the more we can delay, the more we can reduce parental provision, the better it is for kids.
You talk about picking your battles. I feel like this is a battle you want to actually...
Yeah, this is one that you want to really go to war on, like absolutely stand your ground and let the kids know once you're 18, your choice, but until you're 18, we really want to discourage in every way, and here are the reasons why. Now, I think we also need to give some parents some tips as we wrap this up.
Well, what's your number one?
Number one, the results of all of the research show that not offering your teen or your baby, your 6-year-old or your 8-year-old or whatever it is, not offering your child alcohol is best. So that's the first tip. The second thing that I would say is if you don't think it's realistic, or if you already know that it's happening, or you kind of feel like you're fighting a losing battle and you're not willing to die on this hill because you've got other more important battles to have. Like you and I think that this is a really important one, but not everyone's going to agree with us on that. What we know from research is that young people who are not supplied alcohol or who are only supplied minimal amounts under the age of 18, I'm talking a sip, that kind of stuff, they're the ones that have the lowest risk of binge drinking. They're the ones that have the lowest risk of experiencing alcohol-related harms. They're the ones that have the lowest likelihood of reporting symptoms of alcohol abuse or alcohol dependence and alcohol use disorder in early adulthood. So we know that adolescence is often a time of experimentation, but this aligns with all the previous research that says just don't allow alcohol before the age of 18. That's the best way to reduce binge drinking risk, physical, psychological, social problems due to alcohol, and it does align with current Australian alcohol guidelines.
Have you got any other tips for parents?
Yeah, just a couple of others. First off, research shows that young people who receive whole drinks from their parents earlier in adolescence, so we're talking maybe 13, 14, 15, or were mainly supplied alcohol by their peers, drank more heavily during adolescence. They were also much more likely to binge drink and report symptoms of problem drinking and experience alcohol-related harms in early adulthood. So if you are going to provide sips, against our better judgment and advice, do it under supervision. Make sure that it's at home and make sure that it's a sip of yours and that they're not sculling the can in front of you or something like that. You want to know who your teens are friends with, and if they're going to go out, you want to make sure that you have some idea of where they're going to be, who they're going to be with, if they'll be home late. They need to know that you want to be involved in a monitoring conversation. I'm not saying track them, because even if you're tracking them on the phone, you can't guarantee that they're going to be making healthy choices, but you want to be monitoring, having an interest, asking the questions. I think also you've got to let them know if there's going to be alcohol, or if they're worried for their safety or for their friend's safety, you are safe to call. You're not going to blow up. You're not going to lose the plot. You don't endorse any of that behavior, but if they need help, they know that you are going to be there for them. I think other than that, you want to just limit access to alcohol at home, have some pretty clear alcohol-specific rules. For instance, you might say no alcohol from friends, or you can only drink it if I'm there to supervise. And you really also want to model positive alcohol behaviors. Make sure that they know, for example, that you don't drink much at all, and you always make sure you've got food in your belly and that you're in a safe place while you're doing it. Those kinds of things I think are also going to be really helpful, especially at this time of year when there's a lot more alcohol flowing a little more freely than it normally does.
Well, I think that's a wrap for today.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more info about making your family happy, visit happyfamilies.com.au. And if you'd like more information about the things specifically in this podcast, check the show notes. We've added links to a range of different websites and studies that can tell you more about why we've taken the stand we have.